I always talk about the couch fort as my example for these classes on art and spirit, just to make that point that it's not necessary for the artists to have the intention for the things that we get in their art, as long as we don't violate one of their personal principles or something that they have said. And that just because we've got the picture of the couch up there, the couch fort, the idea being that if this boy's father is a physicist, he can come in and give an hour's lesson probably on why that fort works and all the physics that's involved in it. And of course, the kid knows nothing about any of that. He just built a fort. And I just suspect that a lot of the rules around art, the things that make it engaging, the things that make it beautiful, the things that make a piece of art successful, I think there's rules and laws around that and indicators for why that is that could be studied. And so I believe that we can pull those spiritual ideals out of a work of art because whether or not it's the intention of the fort builder to know the physics behind what he's doing, he still has to have a working uh, familiarity with those rules and laws in order to get his fort to stand. And so it is with the artist. So that's why we take a lot of I guess the permission, what license, I guess, to go in and grab a lot of beautiful ideals, spiritual ideals from these pieces of art. I got two artists today. If we can't cover them in our 45 minutes, so if you could give me a heads up at 45 minutes, that'd be great. Then we'll split it and do the other one next week. But we're going to
Okay.
start with Rakib Shah. He was a born in uh, uh, Kashmir, India, and he was raised in a Muslim family. And uh, this man has really, really suffered. He's just a brief, I guess, biography on him. His studio in Kashmir was burned to the ground. In some of the uprisings between the Hindus and the Muslims. He ended up fleeing to Delhi and enrolled in school there, and was so heartily abused there for being a Muslim and for being, he says he himself has always been effeminate and rather very direct in his manner, and so he's been had quite an abusive life, to speak lightly of it. And so he went from there to London. And in London, he was working for his family as a merchant in one of their three or four stores that they had there. Lost interest in it just because of the mundane aspect of being a merchant, and was at the National Art Gallery there and saw these beautiful paintings of merchants. And he thought, well, how interesting to be a painter of merchants instead of a merchant. So he literally dove into it, but he had no money. He had less than £1,000 to his name when he arrived there in London. So he squatted in an old factory and lived without hot water or heat for several years in a row, working on his painting and working on his art. And because of his lack of funds, he used a lot of very common household items. He was using a very cheap house paint and was building up these little, using, things akin to nail polish and little fake gems and whatnot, in order to create these outlines. And then he would fill these outlines with these shiny acrylic type paints. And that gave birth to his style, which is just full of color, full of expression, very ornamented. Um, he uses a huge number of references to the traditions he grew up around, the Muslim tradition, the Hindu tradition, Kashmiri traditions, and all of the symbology. He just feels very free in bringing all of it to the front. His art is very personal. It's about his journey, and that's what made it very interesting to me, is the experience of a man, a Muslim man growing up in Kashmir, as a gay man, and being expelled from his family, which I didn't mention, after he had moved to London, being disowned by his family, and being able to go from that to an artist whose last painting sold for 2.7 million pounds.
Wow.
So quite an exceptional story. And so I was very excited to share some of that work this today. So Rakib Shah, born 1974, so he's a youngster, 9 years younger than I am. Indian-born, London-based artist, known for his opulent. That's a great word when you see his works. I first ran into his works in the Museum of Modern Art in Edinburgh about 5 years ago. And when I walked into the room and saw this enormous painting just glittering like a jewel on the wall, I got so enamored by it. And the closer I got, the more amazing it became, because usually paintings that look great from a distance, when you get up close, there's not much detail there. They're very abstract or whatnot. But his paintings are beautiful from a distance, and the closer you get, the more detail you see. And that means even when you're getting within 6 inches of the canvas, you're seeing more and more detail in his work. It takes him years to finish a painting. So he's known for his opulent and intricately detailed paintings of imagined paradises inlaid with vibrantly colored jewels and enamel. His paintings and sculptures evoke the work of old masters such as Holbein and Bosch, whilst drawing on multifarious sources from mythology and religion to poetry, literature, art history, textiles, and decorative arts from both Eastern and Western traditions, all infused with the artist's imagination. So reading that, you can see why there's an interest on my part for him, just drawing all of these backgrounds, all of these nationalities, all of these religious and artistic traditions, and bringing them all together and presenting them as his own form of art was very inspiring to me, and connected with kind of how I feel about the divine inside, and wanting to do very much the same thing, to present an integrated story of a fragmented whole. So I think he does that. This is one of his paintings here. This is a self-portrait of him in his studio. And just take a moment and sort of digest everything that you're looking at there. Look carefully. There's a lot of details in there, a lot of things to come out. But it says that Shah himself is a key player in his paintings, albeit heavily disguised. In his response to Cranach the Elder, a blue-skinned version of himself, he takes the place of a witch sitting before a representation of Dal Lake, Kashmir, and gazing at a crystal ball which shows the remains of his torched flat that was burned down during the uprisings. So you see him with the winged character there painting. His dogs are always in his pictures with him. And you have the crystal ball there of his, of really a real sign of his suffering, sign of the battle that he's going on. But you can see how he juxtaposes, he tells a story in his painting. It's interesting on the left, you get that at first glance, that looks like it's going to be full of angels and cherubims and paradise, like happy figures. But because of his background and growing up a gay man in that environment, he talks about his inability to really open to that ideal. And so you can see on the faces, there's some trepidation in these spirits, even though they're in the beautiful colorings and the paradisical surroundings. There's a concern. Some of them have a slight look of relief. Some of them have a pleading look. Some of them just have a hopeful look. Some of them are very doubtful. And you see how it moves from that into this paradise on the right, where you've got the tree of good and evil, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil being represented there. And very interestingly, right in front, the crucifix.
Mm-hmm.
So for him to be including that, he mentioned that growing up, he went to a Catholic school, and
Mhm.
so prayed the offices 5 times a day, as
Mm.
a Muslim man from Kashmir. So you can see that there's sort of a promise of paradise, a promise or a hope or a reaching for this transcendence, this enlightenment, this integration. But you can see that everywhere that there's a representation of that, there's a doubt to it. You look at the on the table there, this bowl of fruit, and what is it that's hiding in the midst of that fruit? A serpent that's in striking form, coming up to bite. And so he always has that yin and yang element in there. There is no absolute beauty in his imagery. There's always a warning, and yet the overall integrated feeling is of just opulence in there. He's a very deep thinker. He's constantly looking at his own death, and there's a close up of it. To get a closer look, you can see that the serpent there, and all the grapes and all the fine. There's dates and figs and what do you call those? They have all the little red seeds and the pomegranate. So all of the fruits native to that area in Kashmir, to that part of the world, not the Middle East, but well, that part of the world, whatever you call that, and the wine and the fresh flowers, all very timely. And you can see that it's part of his art, part of his expression. This is a close up of that top half of the painting there. And again, over here, you've got these odd characters you're not quite sure what to make of. They're not suffering. Ah, they're not suffering. They're not really afraid. They're just unsure. You can see each of their faces is rather supplicating and hopeful and pleading in a way. Some of them relieved, like this man here seems somewhat relieved. Somewhat reaching. There's a bit of devotion in that face, hopefulness. And so as they all kind of come toward what would be paradise here, and perhaps the forgiveness of Christ, or perhaps that hope for grace is depicted in that story there. All those shining lines you see are raised lines of a metallic paint. All of his colorings inside are fills with this enamel paint, sort of like a nail polish. So they glisten. They have a iridescent quality to them when you see them in person. This one called The Last Rites of the Ego of the Artist in the Temple of Shankaracharya. So that's
Wow. Wow. Swami.
yeah,
Ooh,
look at
ooh.
that.
Gee.
Last Rites of the Ego. So there he is. Um, you know, reading his
Ooh.
last rites. That's him. That's his ego dead in the coffin there.
Mhm.
And these birds all around. In one place he mentions, that these birds are one of the vehicles of a deity popular up in Kashmir. Shanu, is it? She rides the crow or the raven, and she
Mhm.
prevents the raven from stealing, from being a theft of properties. And so here you have all of these birds fighting in battle with one another as the ego dies. These graspings at things ethereal. He talks later on. We'll come back to the bird as one of his symbols, but then also this winter, the temple of Shankaracharya there in the background. Clearly closed for the season, frozen in, the icicles everywhere as this setting or this closing of the ego. If you look close at his face, I think the next page oops, has a close up there on the left of him doing the last rites, and you see that the skin is breaking. There's that the life is not fully there. So the body is also temporary. And he says that all of his paintings encapsulate that angst, or that knowledge that everything is temporary, everything is disappearing. And he always shows that in the human forms. The bodies are always broken in some way to suggest death, to suggest impermanence. And so you kind of see the whole idea of just this, the winter, the closing, the death of the ego, the death of the lower self, and him standing there in his brightly colored coat reading the final scriptures in the presence of what would be very special to him, Shankaracharya's temple in the background, high in the mountains. And again,
it's really amazing, Swami.
It's beautiful. Just
yes.
the way he uses color, and every single one of those lines in the wings of the crow, it was just, look at that, just each one of them hand outlined with this metallic paint and then filled in everywhere. Just the detail gets deeper and deeper the more you look.
And just the expression of the crows, the fighting spirit of just, it's a beautiful, lovely job.
Yeah. And you can feel the struggle.
Yeah.
The sense, the feeling of loss, but just not so much the loss as much as what the amount of conflict that brings him to this point.
Mm-hmm.
The paintings are metaphoric self-portraits. How I live my life within the studio and what the outside world means to me. They are extremely coded works of extremely personal. And this portrait here is me in ball and chain looking at a mirror in the studio, and it reminds me of Sappho saying, if you seek to find yourself, look not in the mirror, for there is but a shadow there, a stranger.
I love that little phrase that he ends with there. He says, if you're looking for yourself, don't look in the mirror, for it's but a shadow. And that's just, that is just Vedanta 101. This world is the mirror. This mind, this world is your mind. It's your conscious self, your infinite self reflected in mind. And so don't look for yourself in mind. Don't look for yourself in the reflection. There's nothing but shadow there. And so that's that whole talk of practice, especially in our Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind class that we're talking about, withdrawing yourself from this sense of being the shadow, being this body mind, this reflection or this symbol of self within the reflection of the mind. And that he uses all of those images for him, the reflected mirror on the floor, and his idea of bondage that we talk about in spiritual life. He's got balls and chains on both feet, and his body is already a skeleton, already emaciated, already dead, as it were, and yet still living. So you can see a lot of his statements, the intense power of the suffering he's gone through, considering himself already dead, though still animated, utterly bound, seeking for himself, trying to find the truth, and yet surrounding himself in this opulent beauty, which at first is just so attractive and so overwhelmingly excessive. And yet when you look closer, you see all of these half-decayed figures hanging from the ceiling, hanging from the portal there, suspended and bound, unable to reach or participate in the opulence on the ground, suspended above it, out of reach of all of these things. And the slain lamb down in the bottom right-hand corner, full of the slain lamb, that's the Jesus figure, And then again, he's got up on the arch on the right here in front of the green, he's got one of the deities, one of the Hindu deities there, perhaps Shiva. Can't quite get a good enough look on him, but all of these things coming together outside, a beautiful spring day, bright and sunny, and yet this turmoil inside. But all the pieces are there. His dogs, you'll always find his dogs in his artwork for some reason.
The paintings are and also the last chapter is going to be my fear. So it's very, very much like an epic story of the human condition, my experiences on Earth, and my fears as well.
Yes. For example, the first chapter is with the moon.
Well, the first chapter is no, my darling. This is me in Kashmir when I was younger. So you do see the solitary figure howling at the moon, and you do see the coniferous trees, which are very, very similar to what you see in the Himalayas. And then you also do have the cherry blossoms and the swallows. So it's and also the way the painting goes from night to day. It also does turn from season, from winter to spring. In a way, it is a metaphor for not only a visual metaphor, but a psychological metaphor, if I may say, the beginning of loss of innocence and solitude and isolation. This figure is actually it is a self-portrait, and it is this figure that is suspended from a tree, and he's trying to catch birds, but he can't really catch birds because it's an absolute futile thing to do because he's in bondage, and also the birds in a way they. Not only is he trying to catch them, the birds become a sort of a metaphor of a sort of a sigh. So it's almost that the birds become a sort of a sigh of helplessness and distress. The material is very solid. It doesn't really move. So it's very interesting to create through the composition movement. So you do see that movement, and he's sort of swinging on a pendulum because each one of these figures, they're absolutely helpless. They're trying to do things, but they really, really can't because they're completely good, I think.
This beautiful painting. You see, he reads it from the left to the right. As a child growing up, rather isolated, howling at the moon, the lone wolf out there, surrounded by such beauty, but no one to share it with. And then these mountain scenes here. I don't see if this, yes. In the middle, these mountain scenes, on the left in the dark, on that protective side of the cliff, more toward his youth, are all of the animals that are food, basically. The deer, in hiding and running up that side of the hill. And then on the other side of the hill, you have the predators, the bears, feasting on them. And so that's his loss of innocence. He finds the world to be a dog-eat-dog world, that everybody is exploiting everybody, and that everybody's trying to get the most for themselves at the expense of everyone else. And you see his own sense of self as he's suspended, bound in the tree, reaching for the birds, reaching for that freedom, and yet being completely bound. And those birds representing the sigh of that battle, just the exhaustion, and bringing to the forefront, our hunger inside as we try and find fulfillment, or as we try and find meaning or depth in the shadow, in the material world, and the struggle for what that means and for what it is, and the impossibility of reaching it. And yet at the same time, look at the tree he's suspended from, this beautiful springtime blossomed tree, again, surrounded by beauty, surrounded by opulence, and yet surrounded by death and struggle and pain. And as I looked at his art, I just felt such a camaraderie with that, of the experience of life, that here we seem to be, it's Tantalus, it's being tied up and stuck in that pond that Tantalus is in, where whenever he gets thirsty, he tries to bend down to drink, but the water recedes, so he can't ever have a drink, and yet he's neck deep in water. And when he's hungry, there's these branches suspended just above his head with fruit dangling down in front. And when he reaches up to get to the fruit, the branches of the tree rise. So the curse of Tantalus, is brought to mind in what he's depicting here. And just, this is really why it's so hard for us to keep a conscious awareness of things. Because when you're presented with this level of contradiction and opposition in life, a life with no meaning, a life that seems shallow, a life that seems without purpose, and yet everything is calling your name, everything looks beautiful, everything looks like it's going to take care of the desire, and at the same time, the satisfaction never lasts, never fills you with it. And just how he's able to catch that in such a magnificent and beautiful way. Here you have another temple of the Divine Mother. And again, it's showering gold coins onto the floor in this room. And he is crouching down by that left pillar there in obeisance to the Divine Mother, himself half dead already, clutching his two dogs as he's on his knees before the image, flowers strewn around the room, the colors again, richness. But you can see this I don't know, this vulgarity in the animals, representing, I think, the wealthy and the opulent of this world, running around with their trays of money, no appreciation or understanding for them, just animals in a world of sophistication, understanding nothing. And again, suspended above, look at all the human bodies in decay, all of them in bondage, all of them reaching, trying to get their bonds undone, trying to undo their chains, even as the body is giving up, even as the body's literally falling into death. And yet the struggle takes them all the way to the end of it. So let me give you a moment, anybody, to respond or to have an idea or to say something if that's you're moved by in these works.
I don't have the words. I'm just like, I'm just so overwhelmed by the imagery and the beauty of and the themes. So thank you. I just want to thank you for introducing the artist and the work.
Yes.
It's just beautiful.
Yeah, he's very powerful.
Very powerful.
And he struggled a lot. You can tell there's a lot of
Mhm.
thought, tremendous thought, Swami,
Yeah.
into all of this, and the imagery and the metaphor is really
Mhm.
quite overwhelming in some ways.
Yeah.
And all his work is in England?
Well, he shows he lives in London, but he shows around the world now. I mean, he's been in the MoMA in New York. He's been in the National Gallery. So his work at this point is very well known, very, very well appreciated. It's interesting because when he went to art school, he was ridiculed for his one, wanting to be a visual artist, a painter. He said at that time everybody was doing performance art and wanted film and installation work, and he was painting, and he was working on his skills, on his ability to paint, and he was mocked for that because abstract is the modern tendency. So he was mocked for that. And he said when he did his master's show, his gallery show, no one came. And he said it was he says it was a real disaster, except for one gentleman on the last day came in, a very tall gentleman, was dressed in a suit, looked very nice. And the gentleman was walking around looking at the artwork and taking quite a bit of time. And his teacher told him, go talk to him. He's in a business suit. He's probably somebody important. So he goes over and talks to him, and he turned out to be one of the what do you call that? Someone who curators for one of the big galleries in London.
Mm.
And the man told him, he said, I would like to have somebody meet you. Give you my card. Please get in touch with me to make the arrangements. It turned out to be the gallery owner who put up his art for the first time, and it just took off from there. Like I said, his last painting sold for 2.7 million pounds, not dollars, but pounds.
And are all his paintings so large, Swami? They're big, right?
They are. They're quite large. Like when I went in the Edinburgh the Modern Art Gallery in Edinburgh, when you walked into the room, there was only like 5 of the paintings in the whole room, and they were about 8 feet high and about 5 feet wide. And there was just no escape. You know, usually when you walk into an art gallery, you're kind of in a flurry of thought because there's so much happening in that room. But you walked into this room and it was just like, boom, you know, you were caught immediately by the extravagance and the wonder of these amazing paintings. And then you just went, like I said, the closer you got, the more you saw and the deeper it went. And you just wanted to know, you know, you wanted to know, what is that? What does he mean by that? What is he? It's clear that he's saying something with everything in the work.
What surface is he using for painting?
Oh boy, I believe it's canvas.
Oh, it is canvas?
I think so. Let's see here. See if I can see anything in here different that says otherwise. He's a fascinating person, though. He lives alone. He bought an old factory and has repurposed it into a home and studio. And he lives there by himself, and he never leaves. Doesn't go out. Stays inside all the time. He creates, or not creates, but he has a huge bonsai collection. And he says he really likes it because it gives him the proper idea of life. He says these bonsais are several hundred years older than he is. And he says, so you never, he says a very interesting thing about working with the bonsais. He said, you never own a bonsai. You tend a bonsai because it's going to last hundreds of years beyond you. And it's your duty as a bonsai tender to find the next person, the next caretaker before you die, and to pass that tree on to somebody who's going to value it and take care of it. But I loved that idea because it's really everything that he sings about in his work is that notion of impermanence, that, you know, we're just here for a while. And he sees that embodied in a bonsai tree, you know, which is a living work of art that's taken care of and tended to by multiple caretakers through the course of its life, you know.
Seems like he's just a monk in a suit. Really,
and well, truly, you know, my kind of monk. I don't know that you'd find a monastery that would let him in with some of his ideas, but definitely my kind of monk, someone afraid of nothing, you know. These are some of his sculptures, which are quite fascinating.
Wow.
Amazing. He must be so, I don't know. I'm not sure whether there's so much torture in him or so much peace in him or both. It's like
satire on how we actually relate to each other and also the human condition. I mean, the whole place is dog eats dog and man eats man kind of thing.
Wow.
Wow.
The sculptures, they're so full of energy. There's so much, again, that straining, pressing.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating about it is that they're human form, but they're bats. So they're blind. They can't see.
Oh, you're right.
You know, so in their struggle, you see that they can't see each other. They're just grasping and holding. And you look at where their genitals should be, and what are there? There's gaping jaws with giant teeth. You know,
Mhm.
in this whole notion of exploitation, of devouring one another for pleasure, for power, for, you know, intimacy, for all of the needs that we and hungers that this world causes in us, and the wrestling to get that from each other, you know, everybody trying to take at the same time. So he really sees, you know, these images. He himself says they're erotic, you know, they're a celebration of the human form, but in the context of the world where
Right.
just it's dog eat dog, you
And
know, get
exploits
what you
them.
can take. Yeah,
Mhm.
exploitation everywhere. And so even though they're erotic and they're intimate, they're also alienating and isolating. You can see each of the figures, none of them meeting eyes, none of them in any showing any intimacy of connection at all, but all of them just in turmoil, in a private war, as it were, going on. This one here I liked just in particular, you know, his bondage is his own. He's the one, you know, about Vivekananda says, yours is the hand that holds the rope that binds you down. Let go thy hold, sannyasin bold, say Om Tat Sat Om. And here he has that exact scenario going on. You know, here this man is his own bondage, his own suffering, and yet he can't let go. You know, it's tied in deeply with his hunger and his need and his expression. And yet there he is. A lot of imagery there from the S&M community in the gay world, the leather community. A lot of that imagery, the boots, the leashes, the armbands, you know, the
I can't see
jockstrap.
the face. Is that a kind of animal? Is the face
Bat.
Oh,
visible?
yes, this one's also a bat.
Oh, okay.
You know,
Do you
also
have the front of it, Swami?
I don't have the front of this one,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
Mm.
I don't think. Nope.
Mhm.
So
It's
yes.
341, Swami.
Okay, so that's Rakib Shaw. So
Wow.
we'll save Robert Rauschenberg for next week. But yeah, no, he's
Very powerful. I'm really very affected by it. It's
it's very poignant. It brings it right down in front of you, doesn't it?
mhm.
You can't not identify with his work. You don't really want it to be true. You don't want that to be the nature of things, which is why it's so hard for us. You know, we want the answer to be here. We want the answer to be in form. We want the answer to be material, to be physical, and yet it can't be. You know, it really does come down to what he's portraying as the reality. Um, but you know, look, in the midst of all of that, look at the beauty he's creating. You look at how he, despite all of his tortured life, uh, his notion, his desire is to create beauty. And he sees it. You can tell when you look at the painting as a whole, when you first look at it before it breaks into its components, is stunningly beautiful. Stunningly beautiful. And again, what a beautiful metaphor for the world. You know, you can go look at the mountains, you can go look at the sea, you see it's stunningly beautiful. And yet then the experience of the world can be such a struggle, such an anxiety, you know, such a pain. And yet that is the beauty. You know, in a way, that is the profundity of it, that there is a beauty in suffering. There is a beauty in the struggle and the strain and the fight. Uh, it's I don't know, it's profound. And I think his work really brings that profundity right to your feet.
Mhm.
So, all right. So next week we'll do Rauschenberg, who's a completely different
Mhm.
artist. completely different approach. He's a man of the present, very calm. One of the nice things I read about him is that in the interviews, the people that knew him, they said they never knew him to be angry. Very, very calm man. So we're going to get a very different perspective next week.
Thank you for introducing this artist.
Yes,
Beautiful.
Rakeem Shah. If you get a chance to see it in person. It's worth it.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. I have never heard of him, although he comes from the
Yeah.
Indian soil. But
I did not
obviously he
hear from
doesn't
him
stay in
either.
India, so
Yeah, and if you, I mean, of course, some of his interviews are rather shocking. He's got a mouth on him, but he'll tell it like it is, which I really appreciated. But he has a deep respect for the Vedanta tradition that he mentions by name, and says
really?
and really says that the heart of the Vedanta is from the Himalayas. You know, from from Kashmir, where he's from. He mentions Kashmiri Shaivism,
Mhm.
and then of course he himself grew up as a Muslim, which didn't last long. You know, you can't really grow up as a gay man in Islam, but so that was the heart of a lot of his suffering. He paid a
Yeah.
tremendous price for it. He said his voice never changed, so it always kept a high pitch, and he suffered. He said he got endless
very
ridicule for that,
Oh,
and then because he was naturally effeminate, you
Yeah.
know, he got ridiculed for that indefinitely.
Yeah.
And then finally, it got to such a state that his family completely excommunicated him, just cut him off, and
So much.
left him with nothing. So he had to
So
move into an
sad.
abandoned factory in London and live for like 4 or 5 years with no heat and no hot water in
Wow.
an abandoned building. So wow.
Wow. Yeah, he's
So much
really
suffering. That's what comes out in the art.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, you don't put a tag on it like it was suffering as tapas. You see it as part of the process, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So you don't have to give it a name, but that's what's happening. Looking at his paintings, there's a painter named Julio Galan. Is he died? He's from Monterrey, and a lot of similarities, a lot of words, a lot of words to be painted in a canvas, because those are Julio Galan's words. It's difficult to be in silence. In silence, always comes. It's easier to hear all the negative, all the past calling you.
Yeah.
So you exercise it, but putting it there,
Right.
not keeping it here, right? So the more you paint, the more detail you put into it, the more attention you put into it, the more the exercise itself takes you away to that painting, and to let everything you have in your mind go there.
Yes.
So
Beautiful.
for a minute or two, or an hour, or 2 hours. So the more detailed you work on it, the more time you spend away from what hurts you.
Right. Expressing it. But there, oh my God, you got me so excited. I'm only gonna take 2 minutes here. But what you say, the amount of attention that you put on it, right? That's exactly our spiritual practice, to become aware. It's a practice of awareness of awareness. So the exact practice that he's doing, which is why Thakur says, if you see greatness anywhere, a great artist, a great dancer, a great musician, he said, know that they are only one step from realization, just a slight turn of the mind, and they will have their realization. It's because they're doing practice in exactly the way that you're talking about. And it's the same promise for us. The more attention you put in this moment, the more presence you have in this moment, the less your suffering will be. the less you will misunderstand the reflection, the story around you, the more dispassion for the hunger that you feel toward the material, that exactly as you said it is exactly the point, not just of his art and of his process, but of the very process of living, the very process of being, the very process of transcending. Oh, Jose, thank you. I mean, that's exactly what I want this
Beautifully
class to say. That's
Mhm.
exactly it.
It's
Yeah.
a beautiful thing that Bindu say on Sunday, if I remember, and I think she said, "I wish my whole day was like my morning time,"
Mhm.
and that's exactly what most of the times pass when you're in your art. It's your morning time,
Yeah.
so
Thank
you
you.
communicate to that, and it's your morning time.
Yes, your awakening, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. What a great way to close the session. Very
Yes,
nice.
indeed.
Thank you, Jose.
All
And
right.
thank you, Swami. Yeah.
Indeed, Jai Ma, be well.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
Ma.
Swami.
See you
I
either
don't want to go. I don't want to go. Don't want you to go. No, it's okay. Go, go.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
All right.
right.
Thank you,
Okay.
Swami. Thank you so
Indeed.
much.
Thank
Indeed.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Everyone
Be
be
Thank you,
well.
Jose.
Well. Jai Ma.
Bye.